with a story this morning. There was a Buddhist monk who went to a Zen pizza parlor, and he stepped up to the counter and he said, "I will have a slice with everything." And so the gentleman went back and prepared his slice, and when he brought back his order, the Buddhist monk gave the proprietor $20. The proprietor said thank you and turned to walk away, and the monk said, "Well, wait a minute, where's my change?" And the owner turned back and looked him in the eye and said, "Change? Change, my friend, must come from within." So I was reading that silly joke, and it made me think about talking to God. Can we talk to God? And of course we can. Neil Donald Walsh made a whole career out of his conversations with God, as he called it. Ernest Holmes wrote a book with a title based on a 1934 lecture that he made teaching the law of cause and effect and what he called spiritual mind treatment, which is affirmative prayer. And it was called Can We Talk to God? I talk about it all the time when I'm talking about affirmative prayer, spiritual mind treatment. Our guided meditation is a conversation with God. Every thought, actually, that we have is a conversation with God or the divine or spirit. But my question today, with respect to Neil Walsh and Dr. Holmes, is, does it talk back? This spirit, this presence, this force, this Big Bang. Better yet, does it ever start the conversation? Now, lately I've been starting our celebration with a version of this affirmation. And it says, "I am an irresistible magnet with the power to attract unto myself everything that I divinely desire according to the thoughts, feelings, and mental pictures I constantly entertain and radiate. I am the center of my universe. I have the power to create whatever I mentally choose and accept. I begin choosing and mentally accepting the highest and best in my life. I now choose lavish abundance for myself and for all mankind. This is a rich, friendly universe, and I accept its riches and hospitality now." Now, that was written by a woman named Vetura Papke. Vetura Papke was the practitioner that Ernest Holmes used after his dear wife Hazel passed on, who was his practitioner in her life. But after she passed on, he used Vetura Papke as his practitioner when he ever decided he needed some assistance in knowing the truth. We're not only attracting experiences into our lives, we're attracting the wisdom that will penetrate our mind and consciousness with the ideas, the tactics, the answers, and sometimes even more questions that will take us deeper into the solutions of whatever's going on at that moment. But how do we penetrate our own minds? Well, we do it every day, actually, through our thoughts, through our self-talk. We're so smart at penetrating our minds that too many of our thoughts end up talking ourselves out of things like success and health and kindness and knowing that who is speaking is God speaking. We talk ourselves out of that. We penetrate our mind. We penetrate the download that we naturally have. Jane Roberts, who wrote the Seth Speaks books, wrote in The Nature of Personal Reality, the human mind is really more of a process. It is not a completed thing like an arm or a leg, but a relationship and a process. And part of that process is the relationship and conversation that exists in our solar plexus, down here in the gut, or the third eye chakra, as it's talked about in the energy worlds. Now I know the head brain seems supreme, it reigns supreme, but the gut is actually older, the gut brain. Before you even had a neocortex or a frontal lobe, you had gut instincts to guide you. We've had those since prehistoric days. The enteric nervous system consists of sheaths of neurons embedded in the walls of this long tube that goes all the way from the bottom of our torso all the way up to our esophagus. It's called the alimentary canal. And it contains some 100 million neurons, more than the spinal cord, more than the peripheral nervous system that runs throughout our body. It uses more than 30 neurotransmitters, just like the brain. And interestingly enough, 95% of the serotonin comes from our bowels, of all places. Now, serotonin is that hormone, that neurotransmitter that regulates mood and social behavior, appetite, etc., etc. And there's a nerve, a primary visceral nerve called the vagus nerve that runs all the way up into our brain from our gut. And that carries information from the gut to the brain. It doesn't work the other way. It comes up, never back down. In fact, they're using and experimenting with electrical stimulation of the vagus nerve to aid in the treatment of depression. So how do we allow divine intelligence to penetrate our conscious and our subconscious mind? And that's by being open and aware of what Steve Jobs called something more powerful than intellect. It is a sacred gift that we receive from the universe. In fact, Nikola Tesla said, "My brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration." And how does that core penetrate our intelligence? How does that penetrating intelligence and penetrate our brains and our minds? Through inspiration. Inspiration is a term from the Latin tuere, meaning to guard and to protect. The Hindus refer to it as the Akashic river of knowledge. Rupert Sheldrake, a biologist, refers to this as the morphic fields where all information floats. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book which I very much enjoyed called Blink. And he talks about the power of thinking without thinking. So how do we crack this intuition code, so to speak? Great idea for a book, Cracking the Intuition Code. Well, Sophie Burnham wrote a book called The Art of Intuition, and she says, "I define intuition as the subtle knowing without ever having any idea why you know it. It's different from thinking. It's different from logic or analysis. It's a knowing without knowing. It's a flooding of the brain with divine penetrating intelligence," is what I define it as. It's a direct messenger of the soul, as Clarissa Pinkola Estes says. She was the author of Women Who Run with the Wolves, another fabulous book. We all have hunches, we all have sudden insights, gut feelings, we get butterflies in the stomach. Those are all hints at what the universe is trying to tell us. Sometimes hints about what our own subconscious is trying to tell us, which of course is directly connected to the universe, to the law. And it's not something to fear. It's not like we're Dr. Faustus making a deal with the devil. That would be some sort of energy of negative thoughts. It's not something we should fear like the heeding the call of the sirens. If you're into mythology, the sirens were these creatures who lured nearby sailors with their enchanting songs and the sailors would then shipwreck their ships on the rocky coast of the island of the Sirens, who would take hold of this. And again, negative energy. We don't have to buy into that. That's destructive voices and ideas. That's usually something we hear because our scared ego, which is edging God out, edging the divine intelligence out, is speaking, or our ideas of lack and limitation are speaking, or some sort of self-talk of judgment masquerading as intuition is speaking. And we do not need to buy into that judgment, those prejudices, those biases when they rear their ugly heads masking as intuition. In the book, Art of Intuition, Sophie Burnham tells a story about two women who were at waiting in a doctor's office, and one of them kind of mistook her intuition for her judgments, her prejudices, her biases. And this woman, her name in the book was Joanne, and she was a brilliant journalist. Now, being a brilliant journalist, she was an observer of fact, right? She works with who, what, where, without opinion. But she had some of her own, of course, and she saw waiting on the other side of the waiting room, the other woman there. And she looked at her, and in her ideas, in her eyes, this woman was unkempt, seemingly disreputable looking. And actually, she found her a little off-putting because she noticed the shadow of a dark mustache on her face. But time passed and boredom set in, and you've been in doctor's offices many times. It takes way longer than your appointment time to get in to see the doctor. And they started speaking. A conversation began. And that's when Joanne realized how her biases got in her way, how her judgments got in her way. And it wasn't some sort of inspiration that stopped her from speaking or starting a conversation with this other woman. Because it was then that she found out that this other woman was a nuclear physicist, and they had a captivating conversation. So when something like that happens, we have to step in through our intellect and see that those instincts were not what we thought were instincts were not instincts. And that we can learn to ignore them and know the truth. Tell them to take a hike. Know that they're from lack and limitation, some judgment, some stupid thing that we learned. And we can take it over using our intellect to discount them as the fear and the judgment and the bias voice that they are. Anne Lamott, the author, wrote, "You get your intuition back when you make space for it, when you stop the chattering of your rational mind. The rational mind doesn't nourish you. You assume that it gives you the truth because the rational mind is the golden calf of this culture, and which this culture worships. But this is not true. Rationality squeezes out much that is rich and juicy and fascinating. Though we may use the rational mind to rid us of these things we think are instincts, there are also times, and probably most of the time, where we don't use the rational mind, because intuition is something that is subtle and creative and constructive and may even not make sense, but it still has those qualities. The key, of course, is to stop and listen to that inner voice, and to that voice that sometimes comes from the body. The body talks to us as well, and to listen to it. So what do you perceive is going on, being said, letting you know? There's a blog called The Zenist, and it said, if courage is the penetration of mind through the fear which seems to overwhelm us, then we can think of calmness as the penetration of mind through the anxieties which confront us, even including anger. Our mind need need not be always passive, always a sponge. If we don't use our mind this way, we gain no strength in it. We get flabby, and we can get flabby with our intuition. We can get flabby in that we don't know the difference between the intuition coming in and the BS coming from our BS. The BS coming from our belief system that somehow we bought into these judgments, these biases. So how do we cultivate our intuition? I have a few quick steps. One, of course, is to tune and raise your vibration and take time for solitude. Again, Nikola Tesla says if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That's what we do when we get into spiritual mind treatment. That's what we do when we do any spiritual practice or guided meditation. God as first cause is the original broadcasting station. So when we tune into that frequency, it is the divine that is revealing itself, extending its vibration out into its creation, which is you, which is me, which is all of us. It's solitude, yes, but solitude is not being alone. Solitude is being at one with the energy and the light of the divine all around us. Number 2, listen, allow, recognize, and act upon that. Allow your spidey sense to emerge. Pay attention to the goosebumps, the tingling in the scalp, the shudders, the icky feelings going on in your belly. Sometimes you hear a word like I talked about when I was describing my decision to step into into ministerial school and how that all came about. Number 3, observe. Be in the moment when you're out in the world, when you're doing the dishes. Don't do it by rote. Do it by focusing on these things. When you walk that same path, when you go out onto your front porch the way you've done it many times, or out the front door of your apartment building as you've done many times, notice that tree. What's happening with that tree? It's a couple inches taller. Wow, it's blooming. Wow, the leaves are turning if it's the fall. Notice those things. It takes a second. It doesn't take away from the focus of you getting to lunch, getting to your next meeting, getting here nor there or anywhere. 4, connect deeply to your feelings and emotions and those of others. When you're feeling your feelings, go ahead, feel them. Don't ignore them. Now, I don't encourage you to indulge in them, to soak in them, and become the victim of them, because we can easily become the victim of our feelings and emotions. We get to, because we have volition and we have choice, we get to choose which ones to keep and which ones to get rid of. Listen to their messages, sometimes they are messages, and let them go. Move on. Number 5, visioning. Directly or indirectly visioning. You can use a visioning process, but write it down, go inward, ask, journal, talk yourself to your higher self. There's an exercise where you can focus on an event and pay attention to the thoughts that emerge when you focus on that event. That's sort of what can step you into affirmative prayer. And then write down what came to you. What words, what images, what colors. They don't even have to make sense. You can make sense of them later. That will come to you. Number 6, pay attention to your dreams. In your dreams, your subconscious mind is talking to you. And sometimes it talks to you in really crazy ways. I'm sure you've noticed. But, take a moment and pay attention to them. They're all symbols. What do they symbolize? Actually, only you can really know what they symbolize. You can look in a dream book and get a general idea, but you're the one. It's you talking to you. Number 7, rest, meditate, sit in nature. I can't say that enough. But I want to add a little thing when you're sitting, and I'll put these in the show notes too, in the comments. Say to yourself things like, I am intuitive, I am knowing, I am alive in the now and connected to my true path and purpose. My insight is strong and can be trusted. I am clearly connected and step firmly into the unlimited possibilities, bringing them into my reality now. Things like that. Invite intuition to speak with you. Jonas Salk, who had invented, along with his crew, the anti-polio vaccine. He said, it is always with excitement that I wake up in the morning wondering what my intuition will toss up to me like gifts from the sea. I work with it and rely on it. So connect with your partner in enlightenment. Your intuition. You can call it what you want. You can call it God, Source, Consciousness, Wise One, the Tao, Gnosis, Source, Chi, Muse. Call it what you want, but open up your gut and allow its penetrating intelligence to call you to your best. Listen. Not just with your ears, listen with your entire body, with your mind, which encompasses everything, with your divine matrix, for those nuggets of wisdom, because they're there to assist you to bust through, soar, and zoom. Thank you so much. Namaste.